20 Questions is a classic game that can be played almost anywhere. Here is a version for book lovers. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I'm doing the 20 Questions for Book Lovers tag. It was originally created by JJ the Bookworm Blacksmith. Here is how she describes her tag. New original tag by me. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, so I hope you like it, and for those I tag, I hope you give it a chance and have fun with it. Well, I was tagged by Book Chat with Pat, and I am going to answer these 20 questions. Question number 1. What book do you gift the most? Well, I don't actually gift a lot of books, but I did gift a copy of this, Collected Fictions by Jorge Luis Borges, to my friend Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. For a number of years, I was looking at used bookstores, trying to find a copy. I never did. So one day, I just ordered a copy from Amazon and had it mailed to his address. If you do not know, Jorge Luis Borges was an Argentinian writer, mostly of short stories, which are quite unusual and peculiar. They don't have any real story to them. They are often just ideas with some characters and some settings. He is utterly fascinating, and you can get lost in his world, his mind, his deep knowledge of things. Utterly bizarre. Other than short stories, he did some poetry and some essays. Question number 2. What book do you recommend the most? Well, there are a number of books that I recommend frequently, but I think this is the one I recommend the most. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. You will be introduced to Ignatius J. Riley, a bloated, fat, bigoted, pompous man who loves the medieval philosopher Boethius. He is terrible in any way you can imagine, but he's also endearing and lovable in his own way, because as he's being such a horrible human being, he actually makes the world a better place. So I recommend this book a lot. It is absolutely hilarious. Question number 3. What book has changed you the most, has shown you a new point of view, given you new knowledge, etc.? When I was a sophomore at the University of Maryland, I first read this book. This is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I was in a sophomore level class studying literature, and each student in the class had to pick one book and then write 5 papers over the semester about that book in different literary styles, such as the bibliographical approach, the critical approach, and so forth. And I absolutely loved this book. This is essentially about an Algerian Frenchman in Algeria who murders a man on the beach. It is the world's most famous existential novel. And what did I learn from this book? I learned that it is okay not to believe in God, because Albert Camus was an atheist and his character was an atheist. I learned that you are responsible for your own actions. The character, Marceau, does take liability for murdering a man on the beach. The third thing that I learned from this novel is nobody has the right to judge you for who you are. In this story, the main character, Marceau, murders an Arab. At this time in Algeria, a Frenchman murdering an Arab would not have been a big deal. It would have been dismissed in the courts, most likely. But Marceau recently had not cried at his mother's funeral, and a man who would not cry at the death of his mother must have something wrong with him. And when he goes to court, that is what he is judged on, not crying for his mother at her funeral. But as Marceau says, nobody has the right to judge me for how I think about my mother and what I want to do about her. That is an important lesson. And those are the 3 lessons that I learned from The Stranger by Albert Camus. Question number 4. What book hasn't left your mind since you read it? In the past year or so, I think the book that fits that the most is Elena Knows by Claudio Pinheiro. This is the story of an elderly woman in Argentina. She is suffering severely from Parkinson's disease. Moving about is a great ordeal for her. Her daughter has recently committed suicide in a church, or so say the police. Elena is not convinced that her daughter committed suicide, so she's out on an epic journey for her with Parkinson's disease across the city of Buenos Aires to talk with someone who may be able to help her understand how her daughter was murdered. This is listed sometimes as a mystery novel, a crime novel, and there is a mystery and a crime at the center of this novel, but it's really about the human spirit and learning to live with life and the consequences of what other people do. Question number 5. What is your most niche favorite book? Well, what the hell is a niche? How can you define it? I will define a niche as the postmodern novel, and if you were familiar with my channel, you will recognize that I hold up this book quite frequently. This is J.R. by William Gaddis. It is definitely a postmodern novel. It is 770 pages of mostly unattributed dialogue without chapter breaks. It is, in essence, a satire on American business. I love it. I find it absolutely hilarious, illuminating, and there's a lot of depth and knowledge and characters in this book. But a lot of people find it utter gibberish and so dense that they cannot get through it. I love it. That's why I think postmodern novels could be a niche, and this is my favorite postmodern novel. Question number 6. What is a popular book you feel lives up to the hype? Babel by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang writes a lot of fantasy novels like The Poppy War. She has written at least one literary novel, Yellowface. But I picked up Babel, which is an historical fantasy set in England during the 1830s. In this alternative England, silver is a magical metal. You can do wonders with silver. And translation. Words matter. What one word is in one language can be found through translation, but is not always exactly the same word in the translated language. And translation is a magical art. And you use the silver as its medium of transference to make this magic happen. And this I found so completely fascinating. I picked up this book on Kindle for $1.99, and one year, it was the end of 2024, I think it was, I picked it up on a whim, saying, I'll just read it to get something done at the end of the year, to say that I read a fantasy novel. And man, what a magnificent novel this is. Question number 7. What is a popular book you were disappointed by or disliked? That would be Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This novel has appeared on many friends' list of favorite novels that they read in the past year, but I did not take to this book. There is an elderly woman named Tova. She is in her 70s, and she is working as a cleaner at an aquarium on the night shift. She's all alone in the aquarium cleaning the displays and the buildings. And in this aquarium, there is Marcellus. He is a Pacific octopus. And Marcellus is incredibly intelligent. He has human-level intelligence, and he narrates chapters in this book. With Tova, the elderly woman, and Marcellus as the octopus, this could have been a fantastic novel. But the author introduces a young character. He's a man in his 20s who just cannot get his life together. And that is where the novel falls apart, with this young man and his relationship between Tova and the octopus sort of stretches things a bit and goes off in directions that I just don't like in my fiction. So this was one novel that I was really disappointed in. Question number 8. What is your favorite book outside your comfort zone? Last year, I was challenged to read a dark stalker romance by a friend online, and that was Lights Out by Navessa Allen. This book has more trigger warnings in the front than you can shake a stick at. It is sexually explicit, really very sexually explicit, and gameplay and sex that would challenge most people. They'd say, I'm not going to do that. And it involves the mafia. And a book with the mafia, sort of kinky stalker sex, you would think wouldn't work. But it worked. I really enjoyed reading this. And I have been dared again to pick up more books by this author. Stay tuned to see if I take up that dare. Question number 9. What book surprised you the most? Twists? You liked it or disliked it? Learned something new, etc. A few years ago, I was a judge for the BookTube Prize in Nonfiction, and I was assigned to read a book, Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Kat Bohannon. As a judge, I did not have a choice of which books I was going to read, and this book was assigned to me. So, as a dutiful judge, I picked it up and started reading it. I did not have a lot of high hopes of interest, that I would not be interested in how the female body drove 200 million years of human evolution. But man, was I drawn into this book. It is fascinating. It is science. There's a story behind the female body and how it evolved and how it is really important to every living person on this planet. So if you think this novel would be boring, it's not. It's a really great book. Question number 10. What is your favorite kind of story to read about? Not genre, but story arc, theme, character archetype, trope, etc. I like dark psychology. I like existential angst. I like the characters to be suffering in their minds, wondering what should be done, wondering anything can happen to them. This would be the Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, the young student who thinks he is so superior to other people that he can murder with impunity. And then he does and thinks and wonders, what have I done? And this is Frankie from The Man with the Golden Arm by Nelson Algren. Frankie is a wounded World War II vet going back to live in his hometown of Chicago. He is addicted to morphine. He has dreams of being a jazz drummer, but he is a dealer of card games. He has a wife, which he crippled in an automobile accident himself, and his life slowly descends into murder and mayhem. And of course, this is Morceau from The Stranger by Albert Camus, the quintessential existential angst novel. Question number 11. What book do you wish you had written? Well, excluding the classics, I'm going to say The Fisherman by John Langan. This is a short horror novel about how people deal with grief. And if you have lost a loved one and you're pondering their death, really, if you hear rumors about how to bring them back from the dead, don't do it. This short novel was completely fascinating. It does have a middle section, which some people dislike, but I like that middle section because it is a side story, a side quest that works on people's grief. Because this is a story, essentially, of what you do when a loved one has died. Number 12. What is your favorite or most rewarding experience with a book? Ulysses by James Joyce. I read this with the Ulysses 6. This was me and a group of 5 other people reading Ulysses over 2 months, one summer. This is a very complicated book, and we had a discussion on Discord and in live streams, and it was just a fascinating and totally rewarding way to read a book, because this is the kind of book that you benefit by reading with other people, and the 5 people that I read this with made a perfect group to enjoy and understand this book. Question number 13. How do you determine what to read next? I have a schedule. I have a schedule that goes out through most of 2026, already written down. I have 5 or 6 books pre-planned for what I'm going to be reading every month in this year. There is a little bit of wiggle room, so I can pick up some books just on my own when I want to read them, but I'm really a very heavy planner. I'm not much of a mood reader. I have a reading schedule. Question number 14. What is a book you wish you had read sooner or not put off for so long? I'm going to talk about War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. There was a group read in 2023, and it's the time I finally read this book. I tried to read it in my 20s on my own, and I never really got to it. But finally, I read War and Peace. This is one of the longest novels ever written, and it is worth the length. Even though Tolstoy does have digressions that some people dislike, I liked Tolstoy's digressions, his history and philosophy of war. It is also very complicated. You have to learn some Russian names, and learning Russian names is something that does not come easily to a native English speaker like myself. But this novel is completely and absolutely rewarding. There is some talk from Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics that he wants to reread this book, maybe 2027 or 2028. Question number 15. What is a book you love but worry won't hold up if you reread it? Pet Sematary. I still call this Stephen King's best novel, although I last read it when it was first published. It is a terrifying story. And I don't think, or maybe, what if it doesn't hold up to rereading, like this other book? This is a classic example of what this question asks. When I was in my late 20s, no, it was when I had just turned 30, I read this. This is A Void by Georges Perec. It is a novel translated from the French. The original French is a lipogram. If you do not know what a lipogram is, it is a constrained way of writing. The writer decides not to use a certain letter in the alphabet and then write without using that letter. Now, you just can't skip the letter. You have to use words that do not contain the letter. And in French, he wrote this without using the letter E. The letter E is the most common letter in the French alphabet. So this is a translation of that book. And this translation is also a lipogram. The author or the translator cannot use the letter E. So this is a very loose translation. It is more in the spirit of what Perec wrote, because translating French with words not using the letter E into English not using the letter E is really rather difficult. And when I first read this when I was 30, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was hotcakes, freshly sliced bread, that kind of thing. And then I reread it when I was 59, and I think, what was my young self thinking? This is clever, it's interesting, but it's no masterpiece. It is stale bread. It is not sliced bread. Question number 16. What is your favorite banned book to read? I had a lot of choices, but eventually I landed on Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This is a graphic memoir of the artist talking to his father. His father was a survivor of Auschwitz, and his father is a work. He's not really a likable man, but it details the Art Spiegelman talking to his father and his father telling him about life before Auschwitz and life during Auschwitz. It is an amazing story. This graphic memoir gets frequently banned. The most common reason it gets banned is nudity, and you get to see cartoon figures of Jews depicted as mice naked in the showers at Auschwitz. That's why it normally gets banned. I don't think that is the real reason it gets banned. This book gets banned because if you are an anti-Semite, if you are a white supremacist, you do not want your children to read books that depict people who are like the anti-Semites, the Nazis, or the white supremacists being cruel and unusual to the Jews. You don't want your children to think that it is wrong to be an anti-Semite. You just want to ignore it entirely. That's why I think this book gets banned, not because of the mouse nudity. Question number 17. What book do you think should be required reading? No doubt in my mind, this book should be taught in every high school, in every college. This is The Demon-Haunted World. Science is a Candle in the Dark by Carl Sagan. This is a great way to be introduced to the power of critical thinking, that science is a fact. You can learn from science. It debunks popular myths and pseudoscience. This book does focus a little heavily on alien abduction theories. When this book was written, that was more popular. There were Midwestern housewives who thought they were abducted by aliens and probed in their posterior. And Carl Sagan goes through the science of why these people were not kidnapped by aliens and they were not probed. Well, at least not probed by aliens. And this is important because critical thinking is on the downslide. People are dismissing it. They're going back to pseudoscience, to religious thinking. But scientific thinking is so incredibly important to our modern world, and people need to be introduced to it. They don't necessarily have to become scientists themselves, but they do need to know the importance of critical thinking and scientific thinking. And again, teach it in every high school, teach it in every college, and the Moms for Liberty, or whatever they want to call themselves, who object to books like this, well, they can go stuff it. Question number 18. What is a book that you love but don't get a chance to talk about as much as you would like? I would like to mention The Adversary Cycle by F. Paul Wilson. This is really 6 novels. F. Paul Wilson was a horror and thriller writer. In 1981, he wrote a horror novel called The Keep. It was set in World War II in the mountains of Romania in an ancient keep that hides an evil presence. In 1984, he wrote The Tomb. It is about, let's just say, a vigilante of sorts in New York City who is hired to find a stolen necklace. Bad things start to happen. Then there was The Touch in 1986, about a doctor in New York City who has gained the ability to heal with his hands. Those 3 novels were written completely independently. There was no interaction between the stories. But then in 1990, F. Paul Wilson wrote Reborn. This is bringing back the evil presence from The Tomb. In 1991, he published Reprisal, a direct sequel to Reborn. And then in 1992, he brings back the characters from The Tomb and The Touch into one unified story that brings it all together. I had originally intended to make a video which talked about all the books in the Adversary Cycle, but I never got around to it. Question number 19. What is the best book you've read so far this year? Well, I am making this video on January 10th, so I have not read too many books yet, but without a doubt, the best book has been The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I just released a video this morning describing my opinions about that novel, so you can go watch that if you want to see why I think it is the best book of the year so far. Question number 20. What is your favorite soliloquy or short speech from literature? I kind of like Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett was an Irishman who went to France during World War II and stayed in France. He originally wrote his early works in English, but switched over to writing in French. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Waiting for Godot is an absurdist play about two men waiting for a man named Godot. Now, Godot is really a metaphor for God. They are waiting for God to show up. And a slight spoiler, Godot never shows up to these two men who are tramps. They meet a traveler named Pozo with a man in a hat named Lucky. Lucky never says anything, or almost never says anything, until he removes his hat. And out comes a stream of consciousness speech, unlike anything else you are going to read or hear on the stage. I'm not going to try to read you a passage because it's really rather bizarre and complicated, and you need some experience, some practice before trying to read Lucky's soliloquy. I would also be remiss if I did not mention the Nada passage from Ernest Hemingway's short story, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. So that is the end of the 20 questions for book lovers. I'm only going to tag two people, MJ at Reading This Life and Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. Thank you for watching and keep on reading.